Listen up. There's no more excuses.
We're empowering those who want the hustle by exposing the status quo.
The days of ordinary are over.
It's time to crush mediocrity and start discovering your greatest potential.
Welcome to the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation. To the Hustle Nation.
Welcome back to Hustle Nation, episode number 3. So the last couple episodes, we talked about the H and the U in hustle and how it kind of means something different to everybody. But in our acronym, each one has a definition. And today we're going to talk about the S, which is smarter, not harder. Dustin, take it away.
Oh, great. So one of the things with hustle is as we look at hustle means something different to everyone. How do we really define it? And so we've talked about the H and the U and that it's about putting the time in, never giving up, putting work forward. But the S really, if you look at what most people talk about, S stands for, the old age-old statement, work smarter, not harder. And to me, I think when you really look at the most productive people, it's really incomplete because there's so many people in this world that the smarter, not harder is because they want to work smarter because they don't really want to work. Right. So they want to just take the time off. Yeah. So to me, it's really incomplete. It's not wrong. I understand why people want to do that. And of course, we all should want to work smarter. But the most successful people, those that really want to hustle, they're working smarter not to go relax on a beach somewhere, right? They're working smarter so that they can double down on the work that's going to move them towards achieving their goals. It's not smarter so that they can take off for the afternoon and have fun with their friends. I got to work smarter because there's no other way I can have it like a cheat code to really getting to my end goal. And so to me, when I look at like hustle, the H and the U is the foundational stuff, right? If you're not putting in time, if you're not grinding day in and day out and never giving up, nothing really ever is going to happen. But now as you start to get into the S, to me, this is almost the cheat code section because this is the time where you see the most productive, effective, results-based leaders. Yes, they have the H. Yes, they have the U, but they're definitely finding ways to work smarter, not just harder.
Dustin, for those just coming in right now, maybe they haven't listened to the first couple, let's do a really brief overview. What is the H? What is the U? And then segue into the S.
For sure. So the H stands for hard work, right? If we look at hard work, there's really 3 key components to it. You got to put the time in. So put the hours in, your pace of play, how fast are you moving, right? And then your prioritization. Because if you're spending a lot of time and you're working really fast, but you're focusing on stuff that doesn't matter, that doesn't really do anything, right? So that's the H work. The H is for hard work. The U is all about unrelenting. Unrelenting is, at its core, it's just about not giving up, right? So,
right.
We talked through that, in our last episode. But the S really starts building upon that. And as we go through all of hustle, each step kind of builds upon the previous step, and it's through, frankly, decades of my own learnings and frankly, a lot of coaching and learning from so many others that have had success of what does it really take? Because to me, hustle is such an interesting thing because we all have a version of it, right? We all have that version that we believe is hustle. But as you and I have talked about in the past, even in, youth sports or in business, you name it, some people think they're hustling and they're really not doing a whole lot. And so to me, the key with hustle is you got to define it, and you got to define it in a lot more detail so we can understand it, learn from it, hold ourselves accountable to it so we can continue to drive towards results.
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned that, like, people think they're working harder, but really they're picking low-hanging fruit, right? And I just to me, that shocks me. And I know on our younger self, we look back and we tend to do that easy stuff, right? Less abrasive, less friction, fewer no's. And at the end of the day, it just feels like we're not getting much done, right? But sure. You talked a lot about in our previous conversations, the 80-20 rule, which I think when you get to a certain point in business or in life, you start to do exactly those things. And that is where you see more productivity, more joy coming out of a day, saying, God damn, I got a lot of shit done today. That felt good, right? But when you're picking the low-hanging fruit, you're like, oh my God, my list is so long. I have so much shit to do. What the hell?
Yeah,
It's all about
it's
the
interesting.
80-20.
It's all about the 80-20. So the 80-20, it's, for those that haven't followed it, it's the Pareto principle, which was created by the guy with the coolest name, as far as I'm concerned, Vilfredo Pareto, right? He was an economist back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And really the idea is it's so basic and you see it everywhere. But the idea is that 20% of your inputs generates 80% of your results. But the opposite is true as well, right? So that means 80% of your inputs are only driving 20% of your results. And there's lots of organizations that have had tremendous success. If you look at ITW, one of the most successful publicly traded companies in the world, they've used the 80-20 principle year in and year out for a lot of their different business units to drive tremendous success. And so from a business perspective, there's an application, right? But it really is all over the place. If you look at any business, many times 20% of their customers are generating 80% of their profits. If you look at, healthcare costs and, around the world, right? Less than, in some cases, it might only even be 5% of people are driving 60 to 70%, but so the idea of the Pareto principle wasn't necessarily that it is exactly 20 and exactly 80, but the idea that there's basically a disproportionate amount of inputs that are driving a disproportionate amount of results, and to really identify those things. And so to me, when I've seen the most successful people of, what is the easiest cheat code in the world, it almost feels unfair when you can identify what those 20% of inputs really are that are driving those 80% of results. And so many people don't focus on that. Even for myself, I know over the years, I've learned how to try to pull that out of my day, because once you identify that, imagine the cheat code. If you could take 20% of your inputs that's driving 80% of your results and make that 50% of your inputs in a day, your results are now exponential. And really, what have you done? You haven't, to the point of you haven't spent more time, energy, or effort. You've just gotten much more focused to do things that really matter.
Yeah, that's a good point. I can't help but think about time management, managing my time. So, for example, I own a couple different small businesses, and the number of requests I get on LinkedIn and email on a daily basis is absurd. And it's people who want to meet with me, whether it be virtual, phone call, in person. If I were to take 3 or 4 or 5 of those meetings a week, that's 20% of my time. Imagine the amount of or lack of productivity that I would have. And so, when I think about this, smarter, not harder, I think some of it goes back to managing your time. But ultimately, I think a better word would be prioritizing your time. So what are the big things that are going to get you to those end goals? If you know your goals and you know where you need to be at the end of the week or the end of the month or the end of the year, you then can prioritize. And I just think that is so important, zooming out to look at those things, right?
Well, I think you just hit on it too, that a lot of people jump over. You have to have the goals to begin with. How the heck do you prioritize in 80-20 your inputs if you have no idea what results you're after? So when we look at how do you really get after this, you're exactly right. You have to start with, what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? What is that result you're actually looking for? Otherwise, you're looking for a needle in a haystack, right? What inputs are looking for what result? I look at it in, variety of different organizations that I'm part of, right? You're always looking at what are those leading indicators to drive to the key results, right? The KPIs that you're looking to drive towards. And that, once you understand that, it almost seems unfair, because now you're looking at saying, wait, all I have to do is focus on this. I'll use our business, McClone Insurance. So, as I was kind of taking over leadership, we were a great company, a great team. We were somewhat stagnant. And in a lot of ways, this is kind of where Hustle came about. And what we started to see was, how are we going to grow? What are the things that need to happen to grow? And certainly this is a multi input problem, right? You got people, you got differentiation, you got tools and resources, your go-to-market strategy, marketing, you got a lot of different pieces. And so certainly there was more than just one thing that had to change. But once we realized, okay, we have a unique product and story, right? We have a unique approach that is delivering unique results. So we can talk about those things. What we started to see was there was, just a few key behaviors that really was the gap between us growing at 2% or 20%. And once you realize what those are, then it's how are we refocusing our time to the point of 80-20 to say, why are we spending all this time? Why are we spending this 80% on stuff that isn't doing anything, isn't creating value, isn't moving the needle forward, isn't making us better? How do we shift to, how do we do more of that 20% that's driving those disproportionate results?
You're so spot on. I think that the hard part for some people, maybe in more of an entry level role, is they may not know their role. They may not know the goals and some of the objectives of the company. And so once you know that, I think if you're a leader, an entrepreneur, you should know your goals. And it's a lot easier then to time management. But I think time management and calendar management are two things that really need to go together. So I go back to just a lot of my personal experience. It was when I started living by my calendar, but it's not just living by it. It's having that transparency. I set reminders for things, sometimes multiple reminders, because when you have that on there, then you can prepare for things. And I think that is one of the other elements in working smarter, not harder, is what's on the road ahead for your week. You have that in there so you can prepare a day in advance, a week in advance, a month in advance. And then when you actually get to the execution, it's like, shit, I'm ready. Like, let's knock this out of the park. And so working smarter, not harder, I think it is a bit of a cheat code, but at the end of the day, it's about doing a lot of little things correctly so that there's less stress, there's less issues, there's less mistakes, and greater execution ultimately, right?
You bet. Well, and what you're talking about is there's two different sides of this. One is the proactive, where am I going to spend my time? What are my goals and where am I going to spend my time? Right. That's more to the calendar management. How do I get ahead of things? There's also the reactive, which is, okay, this was my utopia. This is how I said I was going to spend my time, energy, and throughout the week. What actually happened? It's interesting as I think about, as I've gone through my career, there's been times where if you looked at my calendar, it was gross, right? There was so many different things on the calendar. And don't get me wrong, that was a very busy time in my career. If you look at my calendar today, it looks a lot better today than it did 6 or 7 years ago. But I got twice as much going on now than I did then, right? And so the what I've seen is there's certain stages where you're exactly right. You got to lay out, okay, what am I going to spend my time? How do I get ahead of it? But one of the things I've learned is over time, you lie to yourself about where you're actually spending the time. So one of the things that I've done, and it's a funny thing, this is almost like a therapy session, I feel like, but twice a year I do a time tracker on myself. And so if anyone has ever actually done like a time tracker, a lot of times when people like first get asked to do a time tracker, it's almost like their boss saying, what the heck are you doing all day? Right. And so for me to do it for myself seemed, maybe, I don't know, maybe sadistic or something. I'm not really sure. But what's amazing is every single time I'm about to do it, because it's really just a commitment I've made to myself. I'm going to do it twice a year. Every single time I try to talk myself out of it. It's that self-talk. This is dumb. This is a waste of time. I don't want to do this for a week. Cause I track basically every 10 to 15 minute increment for an entire week, from the moment I wake up in the morning to all the way to I go to bed. And what's amazing to me about it is every single time that I've done it, I've become more productive after, because I realized I'm wasting time on stuff that I had no idea I was wasting my time on. And, to your point of goals earlier, right? So I would spend time on things in the moment that I had a good reason for, right? Whether I was quote unquote relaxing or whether I was solving a problem for a teammate or, helping somebody in the community out, whatever it was always, at the time, you always feel like that's where you're supposed to spend the time. It's when all of a sudden you look back on it and then cumulatively you realize, man, I am wasting all this time. I'll give you a great example. So we, in McClone, we brought on a new head of sales about just under 4 years ago. And he is a driver. He does an excellent job. And one of the things we found is, he and I were talking constantly throughout the day because there was so many different deals happening and so much change happening and things like that we would connect throughout the day, kind of all day, every day. And when I actually did this time tracker, one of the first times, I realized, man, this is like 6 hours of time a day that we're spending hammering things out. Right now, it was at a time where we probably needed, more than the average bear. This wasn't just like status checks, but at the same point, it was scattered throughout the day. So it wasn't that it was 6 hours. If it was 6 hours and we were knocking stuff out, which, we were doing some of that, but it was 6 hours in, 20 minutes here, 40 minutes there, 5 minutes here, 20 minutes there. And all of a sudden you kind of add all this up and you're like, man, this is just a lot of time. How do we narrow this in?
Stop and go, stop and go, stop and go.
It was brutal. It was brutal. And neither one of us, had we not taken a step back, right? I mean, we were moving things forward. Lots of things were progressing. So you wouldn't have realized it. And all of a sudden you take a step back and you're like, geez, I'm spending all this time on this. And it's not good for me. It's not good for him. It's not good for the organization. Right. So how do we challenge ourselves to not lie to ourselves, right? And hold ourselves accountable, because time is an interesting thing. Everybody wants to say that they're great at, time management and, all that sort of stuff. It just doesn't happen. And myself included, right? None of us are good at it. And I think, in my opinion, it's because we end up lying to ourselves, not because we're liars, just because we make up these stories as to where we think we're spending our time. And it's not until it's staring you at the face that's, yeah, why are you complaining about this? The 20% of inputs that you said you're supposed to spend that's driving all the input, you spent 2 hours on last week. Well, that's not going to cut it.
That's a great story. I think that's spot on, and that's great for the listeners to hear. So far, what I have for Smarter Not Harder is, don't exert yourself. This is not about working harder, or not necessarily. I'm sorry. This is not necessarily about working 60 hours a week, because we feel you can do a lot more with the current 40 you have. Second would be, you should audit yourself and you should be honest with where you're spending your time. And outside of the obvious, okay, let's spend a lot less time binge watching Netflix and playing fantasy football. Number 3 would be, you got to set your priorities. You got to know what is the top hanging fruit, not the low hanging fruit. Time management. So you need to get more serious about managing that time. But ultimately, the only way you're going to be able to successfully manage that is by managing your calendar. And once you have that, like you said, sometimes you got to make choices. So you've got multiple meetings. Sometimes you might have 2 or 3, 4 meetings overlapping in a day, but you have to choose, where is it most important for me to be and to focus my time. And then, and obviously with those choices, you have to weave in things like family and sports and kids' activities and etc. And then ultimately, once you have that, then you can be prepared. And when you're prepared, you're going to start to crush it. That's how I feel. I mean, it's an incredible feeling when you go into something prepared and ready. And that's where I think part of that's a mindset, just like the hustle mindset, is when you are prepared, you're confident. And when you're confident, you perform at a much higher level. And I think already, if you've just gotten through the H, the U, and the S, you should be 30, 40, 50% better than where you were before you started.
Absolutely. And I would say even, the 80-20 year focus, I don't think has to be limited to work. If you look at it, if same thing with your family, right? There's time, there is high value time to spend with your family, and there is low value time to spend with your family, right? But it all comes back to goals, right? What are your goals? Well, if your goal is to be a good father and a good husband, well, that's a result, right? So what are the inputs that you need to do, right? And one of them probably is time, but it's not just any kind of time, right? If it's time where I'm sitting on the couch over here and everybody else is sitting in the next room, I'm around, but I'm not present, I'm not engaging. That's probably not the 20% of inputs driving 80% of your relationship results, right? So, to really be thinking about, this isn't just work. This is towards literally any goal that you have, including your life goals, about saying, okay, well, where am I really spending my time? I'll give you, one quick story. So for me, when my son was heading into third grade, I was out in the backyard shooting hoops with him. And both my wife and I are big into basketball in particular, but youth sports. And my son and I were out in the back playing hoops, and I kind of came back into the house, and we were just kind of talking about basketball and talking about my son, and where was it going to go? And she, I said, well, I gotta work on his form, and I gotta work on this. And she's like, well, let me ask you something. Prior to tonight, how many other times have you been in the backyard shooting hoops with him? Which, of course, I did not really want to hear that at the moment, because the truth is it really wasn't that much, right? And certainly when I looked at one of my life goals was certainly to be a good father. And it was actually that day I rose my hand, and that's actually when I started to coach, because I said, look, if one of my goals, what is a thing that I can do? Well, part of it is I got to spend time, with my son, right? And, let's spend time in something that we both love and, we're both passionate about. And so in a lot of ways it started, just that exact same way. So, to me and because what I knew is that 20% of time, right? To this day, some of the most cherished times with my son are the, driving to practice and driving back from practice, right? Because the one thing about kids is in the car, when it's just you and them, you have them captive. So you get a lot of truth serum, you get a lot of good conversations that come from that. And so it was when you look at 80-20, it can apply to so many different things in your life, but it becomes almost that cheat code, because, for me, the reality is I don't have the ability to spend as much time with my wife and kids as maybe some other people, because I have other goals, right? I have other commitments. I have other responsibilities, but that doesn't mean that I can't be good at them. It just means I have to be much more focused as to how am I going to be a good father? How am I going to be a good husband? How am I going to be a good business leader, et cetera?
Yeah, it's funny. I was going to ask you about coaching next, because we both coach youth sports, and we know so many of the followers and listeners do. And that's so important, because I think the same thing can be said of a good leader, particularly at a big company. Just be present, right? Spend time with the right people in the trenches, and where the magic happens out there on the sale floor, wherever it might be in your business. And you're right. Certain times and places you can get people and get them captivated, like team building events, right? Traveling with your colleagues. It's just so critical. One of the last things that I think would be important to wrap up would be the inputs. So you mentioned to people inputs. So let's talk briefly about, what are some of the inputs that people should be looking for, or maybe should be more conscious of in their just daily work.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and my experience has been it all starts with your goals, and understanding what those results are is going to be the number one indicator of what inputs that you have. When then you start looking at, there are some common ones that exist. So, as an example, in business, if you're looking to grow, your time has to be spent on getting in front of new potential customers. And so for every business, depending on your sales cycle or even your business cycle, that could be different, right? So like for our business, as an example, we know so much about our metrics from once we are sitting in front of a potential new customer. We know the number one regulator we have to that is getting in front of more of those people. We know we have it dialed into who our target client is. We know exactly what they need. We know exactly how we can create value. So we can be really, really efficient. But that's today. if you think of, a startup or a newer company, what might be your 20% of inputs is delivering ridiculous value for your top customers, because you need to hone in that value. You need to hone in that differentiation. For others, it might be that 20%. That 20% is me getting everyone in the room aligned in the same direction. So, and that changes based on your role, based on your business, based on where your business sits, or if it's not even business related, right? So if it's an example of it's, your family or a relationship you have, or a fitness goal, or whatever those things are, those inputs can really vary. But, like we talked about earlier, without the goal and without linking, here's the goal, here's the result I'm looking for, tying to what are the inputs, meaning what are the behaviors, not what are like the leading results. Even in my mind, it's what is the behavior that I need to do. I mean, we can use, Hustle Nation as an example. When we looked at, okay, how do we roll out Hustle Nation? Well, some of it is at this point, it's just doing the darn work, right? The 20% is, how do we make this as engaging as humanly possible? How do we prepare as best we can to create as much value for the listeners to want to become part of Hustle Nation, so we can all get better?
Yeah, good point. I think so often people focus too much on the process, which it's great. I mean, that you should focus on the process, but I know people who have attempted to author a book and they just keep writing the damn thing, right? Sometimes you just have to stop and say, this is good enough, and you have to go. And you can't let the thought of getting to perfect hold you back, because I don't think perfect exists. But you're right. I mean, you have to just go and you have to do sometimes, and that's so key. So let's put a cap on this. We talked about a few different things as it relates to the S, which is smarter, not harder. Talked about, it's not about overexerting yourself and working 60. It's about doing better with the 40 hours a week you have. Setting goals, so key to understand where you want to get to at the end of the quarter, the end of the year, or maybe the time you reach 50, whatever it might be. Auditing yourself. And you talked about the time tracker story, which I think was phenomenal. And when you look at that, you have to be honest with yourself, right? Setting priorities, prioritizing your time, knowing what's most important and what's not. Time management, which I think obviously coincides very closely with calendar management, although I'd argue those are two different things. Choices. So sometimes you have to choose where to go, where to be, where to focus your time. And then ultimately the preparation part. If you do all those things, you will be prepared, and the byproduct is you'll crush it. You should be crushing it if you do those things, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That is the cheat code.
I love it. I used to say there are no shortcuts, but I do think along the way there are some cheat codes to get to success or to accelerate what you're working on, and that would be it. Any final thoughts, Dustin?
No, I mean, to me, I think ultimately smarter, not just harder. Don't be more efficient to take your foot off the gas. If you truly are passionate about your goals, why would you waste the time you just worked so hard to gain and not leverage it to get faster to your goals?
That's a great final thought. Don't lose the momentum. Do not take your foot off the gas. I love it. Love it. All right. Thank you so much for watching and listening today. We hope to see you back in the future, where we're going to talk more about the T, the L, and the E. Until next time, keep it real.
Thank you for being part of the Hustle Nation. If you're serious about raising the bar in your personal and professional life and willing to go all in on your success, head over to hustleleaders.com. Here you can get access to our Hustle Productivity ebook, attend our Hustle Masterclass, or challenge yourself to the 30-day Hustle Challenge. Pairing these tools and training with the Hustle Nation podcast will help you advance to a whole new level. Until next time, stay hungry and inspire those around you to hustle.